All right, Mike, you ready for a down the middle, non-controversial topic?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. The attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. I Googled the timeline. So I'm just going to read this. I haven't looked through it yet, but I'm just going to kind of walk through what happened, then we can dissect it.
Okay.
So earlier in the day, July 13th, officials say that Thomas Matthew Crooks bought 50 rounds of 5.56 ammunition for his AK-15 style rifle.
Does it say AK-15?
It does. And that just, and again,
that's a high-speed gun.
this stuff isn't that hard.
AK-15. It's an AR-47.
Yeah. 6 hour 15. This stuff isn't that hard.
Wow.
There are so many people in the modern timeline that use these things like a carpenter uses a framing hammer.
Yeah.
Why do they not run articles like this by a sanity check? Again,
Yeah.
I had just Googled this and I was reading this in real time, and that stopped me in my tracks.
Yeah. You just got one job. Your only job is just to get it accurate and factual.
And if you want people to take you seriously, how can you have something in this like AK-15 style rifle? What they mean is AR-15, which does not mean people assault rifle. That stands for Armalite Rifle.
Yeah.
15.
And it's not a style. It's just, it is an AR-15.
It is, oh man, okay.
Yeah. It's not like a, yeah.
So Mr. Crooks bought 5.56 ammunition for his AK-15 rifle in Bethel Parks, Pennsylvania, and drove north to Butler location of the Butler Farm Show, where the Trump rally, or where Trump was to hold a rally. Parked at a gas station about 1/3 of a mile from the event. Around 5 p.m., a young man is seen pacing around the edges of the rally area, looking at the buildings, acting suspicious. Rallygoers capture his image in cell phone video. Around 5:20, local law enforcement took notice of a man with a backpack and a rangefinder. They radioed their concerns and snapped a photo, but then the man vanished. The image was circulated by officers stationed outside of the security perimeter. Around 5:40, local law enforcement spot the man again about 20 minutes before the shooting. 6:02 p.m., Trump takes the stage to the strains of God Bless the USA. He waves at the cheering crowd and begins his regular rally speech with spectators in front of him and behind him on risers. As Trump is speaking, Secret Service two-person sniper teams can be seen positioned on rooftops behind the stage, looking in opposite direction. Information now that we know that it actually was not the sniper team behind him, though, that took any shots. It was a different sniper location, and what I've heard is that it was like a legendary 1 in a million type shot. So apparently the guy who cracked that round off was an amazing shot. Around 6:09, witnesses reported seeing a man climbing onto the roof of a one-story building closest to the stage. He then set up his AR, thank God they got it right, style rifle, and lay on top of the rooftop, a detonator in his pocket to set off crude explosive devices that were stashed in his car parked nearby. Rallygoers yell to officers, pointing and shouting that an armed man had climbed to the roof of a nearby building. Witnesses capture his image in cell phone video. A local officer climbed to the roof, according to Butler County Sheriff Michael Sloop. Sorry if I said that wrong. Sloop or Sloopy. A man identified by the FBI as Crooks turns towards the officer just before the officer dropped down to safety. Butler Township Manager Tom Knight said the officer lost his grip and was not retreating when he fell 8 feet to the ground. The roof where Crooks lay was an estimated 147 yards, 135 meters from where Trump was speaking. 6:11. Trump continued his speech and turned to his right to point towards a screen displaying border crossing numbers when 3 shots were heard. As the first pop rings out, Trump says, "Oh," and raises his hand to his right ear and looks at it before quickly crouching to the ground behind his lectern. Bunch of pictures, people freaking out. Secret Service agents rush to the stage and pile atop the former president to shield him. Rallygoers scream, crouch down, and run away as heavily armed law enforcement officers surround the stage. Seconds after the first 3 shots, 5 more shots ring out in rapid succession. So it sounds like he got off 8. Comparatori, sorry if I got that wrong, a 50-year-old former fire chief attending the rally is shot and killed. From what I heard, it was a headshot. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro said Comparatori used his body as a shield to protect his wife and daughter. 2 other spectators were critically wounded. One of the injured spectators was seated in the bleachers to the left of Trump as he faced the crowd. The bullet appeared to go past Trump, hitting the person. Secret Service counter snipers fire back and fatally wound Crooks. About 1 minute after the shooter is hit, Secret Service says the shooter is down. Video shows Trump getting to his feet and reaching with his right hand towards his face, which was smeared with blood. As Trump stands up, he pumps his fist to the crowd, which could be one of the most iconic images of the decade, whether you love the guy, hate the guy, whatever it is. The photographer who got that picture, I would probably frame that. I think probably put it up in the office.
Yeah.
About 2 minutes after the shots, Trump turns back to the crowd and again raises a fist right before agents put him into a vehicle and take him to a local hospital. 6:50. So about, what is that? About 30 minutes later, almost 40 minutes later, Secret Service say the former president is safe. That's a lot. Thoughts? Where you want to start with that?
Well,
How about this one? Here's the most common narrative I've heard recently. An inside job. That it was planned and staged to try to elevate Trump's status inside of not only the Republican Party, but to the rest of the voting populace in the world. Before you answer, we are both snipers in the military, right? Do you consider yourself to be a competent sniper?
Yeah.
Did you work with other competent snipers?
Oh, yeah.
Do you know anybody on earth that you would trust to shoot you in the ear as you were turning your head?
Yeah. With iron sights, supposedly.
With iron sights.
AK-15.
Yeah. So let's just start with that.
Yeah. Impossible.
Insane request.
Yeah.
That you would have a death sentence and wish to even think that somebody would do that and that they would have the marksmanship ability to pull that off. Like you said, with iron sights, I'd be fascinated what type of shooting position he was in. I bet you he wasn't even bench resting it or laying it on something. He probably was proned out on his elbows, which is far less stable than even a bipod. Let's just put that conspiracy theory aside. I think that is completely improbable and borders on impossible.
Yeah, I think there's too many mechanics. There's too many variability. There's too much variability in it. When you look at all the elements that happened, it's randomized. When you see something that's very deliberate and planned in advance, that's squared away, you don't see that much variability. You don't see guys like trying to lift themselves and hoist themselves up onto the building. They slip and fall. You don't see officers who are in a window take a picture of a guy and go look for him. You don't see the dissemination of communication the way it is. I would say everything is unintentional. The conspiracy I potentially buy into is that this guy wasn't just a lone wolf who decided randomly to wake up that morning and do what he did. Like the thing that stands out to me, which I'm interested in your take on this. I don't know if you've been to a HME training, like homemade explosive training, where I was surprised at the amount of information people were giving us and training us to do that.
Yeah.
It is a very specific skill set. It actually takes a lot of work and it's very technical. For him to have a remote detonator and actually have explosives that did or didn't work or whatever, that's pretty complicated. That's not something that you just wake up and do.
Unless the reporting agencies who called his rifle an AK-15.
That's true.
Right? There is, I mean.
Yeah. I wonder what the detonator was.
I wonder if he was even a detonator.
Yeah.
I wonder if it was a remote key fob for a garage door opener, which both you and I saw in both theaters being used as the command device for IEDs.
RF, yeah.
So was it, and this is where when I see initial reports, my first thought is, I wonder what the raw data looks like.
Yeah.
Because was there really HME? What I have seen in the past.
Homemade explosives.
Yeah, homemade explosive people. What I have seen in the past is people attempting to have create HME, and they're combining chemicals that don't work together. Yeah. And what they think they can find on the internet to become a deadly device is actually a completely an inert device. Could it be viewed as like, is the attempt and intent still there? Sure. Is it actually that? So I'd be curious to see what this device actually was. Yeah. Because what if a guy actually just goes to a hardware store and buys a pipe with two end fittings and like tapes it up and has, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And solders a wire on the end of it and there's nothing inside of it. I feel like a news reporting agency that reports an AR as an AK-15 might make the mistake of making it sound like it was far more complex than it actually was.
Yeah. You've worked with the Secret Service before. I mean,
Yeah.
you have a relationship, a professional relationship with them. The thing that shocks me is that a random 20-year-old with no skill sets can get up on top of a roof during a rally 135 meters, which we know that's a zero. Like we zero at that range typically, right?
There's a reason. The only reason that Trump is actually alive is that he didn't know to aim for center mass.
Yeah.
I feel like he was trying to take headshots at that distance. We'll call it 100 yards because it's a negligible distance in muzzle velocity. If one of those rounds had hit Trump center mass, 5.56 round, I feel like it is very likely he would have died.
100%. Yeah.
The only reason that didn't happen is I think this person was taking only headshots. And I say that because he missed. And a trained marksman would have known the difference in that.
Yeah. But how does a 20-year-old with no experience get that far down the rabbit hole to get into that position in the first place when you had, according to the congressional hearing, 150 agents, about 75 Secret Service agents, and about 75 local law enforcement between the sheriff's department and then local what's the
Get
word?
it out. Municipality. Municipality. They're
Yeah.
the ones that just had you in prison.
Yeah.
You should know this.
It was jail. It was jail.
Whatever.
Those guys. But you have 150 officers in that vicinity within a, let's call it, I don't know, a square mile. That is insanity to me that could actually happen. And you working with those guys, understanding that there are very good agents that work for that organization. How does that happen?
Well, I think that's the most important question. People are focusing on what happened, and I think you actually have to parse that out and just say there was an assassination attempt. Lone wolf, all these other things like that can be that can bifurcate from that. This is what happened. We need to focus on maybe even less of the why, because I think crazy people do crazy shit. So maybe even take the why out of it, focus on the how. How is it possible that a previous president at a campaign stop is in a place where an untrained, very young individual is able to penetrate security to 130 yards with a relatively high-powered rifle? If they're not reverse engineering that, and I hope that they are doing that internally, whether or not they release that information externally, if they're not doing that internally, I don't think that the organization will survive. And I actually think the best thing they could do to retain their integrity is to do that internal investigation and then release the results clearly as to what happened.
Yeah.
I mean, let's look at their job. The last time the Secret Service was ever pressed in that manner was when the assassination attempt on Reagan. If people who've never watched that video, they had him into the car in under 1 second. And he still almost got killed because one of the rounds hit, I believe it was the door, and ricocheted off, and it hit him. Their reaction time was unbelievable. The difference between that and then what happened on stage, and I've had some people reach out because I did a short video about this. One of the things that boggles my mind is him being on stage for 2 minutes afterwards. The way that I was taught protective detail, if there's anything that happens, the number one thing that you can do is move, get into a hardened structure, a hardened vehicle. And for somebody who had just obviously been wounded and you're not sure the level or severity of the wound, you get them to a higher level of care. But at no point in time of that is it where you're actually sitting on the X and not moving. And I've had a couple of people reach out, the agents were wearing vests. Yeah, but not all vests are created equally, and not all vests cover the vital organs. I mean, imagine if there had been other shooters and they were just having
like a complex attack.
A complex attack where multiple shooters, even if it was only 5.56, which I agree with you is a slightly overpowered 22, but it's zipping along real fast. It can do damage. And just because you're wearing a vest and you're trying to protect a principal, it doesn't mean that's where the round is going to come. So there really is no justification for, they were wearing body armor, so the former president was safe. I disagree with that from a tactical perspective. You have to move and you have to get off of the X. And it begs these questions. Why didn't they? What type of advance was done in that particular situation? What type of coordination and communication? And then you got to layer that on to, in 30 years, 40 years, they haven't been pressed in this way. So their lifespan, you could have a career lifespan of practicing for something that never happened. I mean, if you go back to even our own occupations, I joined pre 9/11. I know you did as well, right?
Mhm.
Imagine though we had gone 20 years without ever experiencing combat, and then for whatever reason, on our last day, we happen to be on a deployment and we are overseas and we get shot at for the first time. How well do you think you would have actually performed?
Yeah.
I don't think I would have performed that well
Yeah, not well at
because I
all.
didn't know what the fuck was happening the first
Yeah.
time I got shot at.
Same. One of the things I think about is, let's take JSOC, for example. JSOC was known in an interoperability, let's just call it lack of communication, was not very good at going into areas of operation that belong to potentially other theater or battle space commanders.
Oh, they hated
And-
it because
and
we
be
would break
conflicted.
shit and then leave.
Yeah, they would just they would get random phone calls and say, hey, these guys are coming in. It's like, what do you mean these guys are coming in? These guys are coming in. You have no choice. This is what's going to happen, and clean up the mess.
Yeah.
And so, from that perspective, typically federal organizations, the FBI, I know this with HRT, I know this with potentially the Secret Service because I work with them overseas. When they go into an area, they're not very good at building the relationship because let's be honest, it's typically randomized. It's like this rally in this space in the middle of nowhere. It's even if they were there the year before, they're talking a new rotation of officers. They're not very good at that. So there's not a lot of good intercommunication and interoperability. They don't even have the right layers of communications to communicate. Even that day, according in congressional hearings, they didn't have the ability to communicate to each other when things were going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
What alarmed me is they didn't have a code word or a pro word that we would use like on target if there was a bomb in the building.
Like a landslide?
A landslide call, right? You're in the building, you see a cell phone rigged to explosives, and that's happened before, and you call a landslide, and everybody knows that's, you don't question that call. You get out of the building as quickly as possible.
It's actually the fastest I've ever seen people move.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Trying to save their own butt. Well, how the local police officers, which I think in this case were doing the right thing, and from all the information, congressional hearings, and the body cam footage that I've seen, they were doing the right thing, but didn't have the ability to communicate that landslide call to Secret Service.
Mm.
So again, it's like, dude, I've been in fire bases. You've probably been in a situation before where I get a phone call. I'm on like talk duty by the phone, pick up the phone. It's like, hey, you guys are potentially going to get a deliberate attack tonight at 01 in the morning. Just be prepared. And they hang up the phone. And I'm like, who was that? And they're like, oh, it's probably the CIA. I'm like, yeah, they don't want to converse with us. No, they just put out calls like that. So we're on stand 2 all night. Nothing happens. And then the attack happens 3 days later or something. It's like, why would they do that?
Yeah.
Well, it's called ego, arrogance, a lack of interoperability, somebody not doing their job, whatever that is. Like, it always exists. I've seen it in every unit that we've worked in, and it sucks because it's so easy to fix. If they were there doing advance on Advon, and they actually did a face-to-face, which would take a couple minutes. Hey guys, my name is, why would you not want to shake the hand of the dude that might be QRFing you?
Yeah.
Protecting your butt on stage. When the body cam footage from the officers that were on top of the roof after the guy, this 20-year-old assassin got smoked by the counter sniper team, they're on top of the roof. The conversation is between the law enforcement officers and the Secret Service agent. This Secret Service agent was just like, I have no idea what's going on. We've never met before. There's no rapport.
Yeah.
And it was such a confusing discussion because nobody knew what was going on because they had never linked up and just did a simple handover. They just didn't do any kind of interoperability. And that's the easiest thing to do that nobody does in those organizations.
I mean, I think one of the most dangerous things I've ever seen overseas is complacency.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying the organization is complacent. What I'm saying is it can creep in such an insidious nature. I have no idea. I'd have to research this, but I bet you that was one of many campaign stops. Maybe not that day, but I bet you they were hopscotching along. I would suspect, based on my knowledge of the manning of the Secret Service, that they are burning candles at both ends. People are burned out and they have to leverage local assets as much as humanly possible. They're going from stop to stop to stop. And slowly over time, the things that you're talking about, the interop, the getting to know people, talking about frequencies, talking about things like a landslide call, especially over a period of years where you do these things. And again, nothing really happens, right? Because I mean, I think you can agree with this too. A lot of the security aspect of many of these things, it's all visual in nature. Look at the security bubble, and that deters almost everybody. Like, I don't want to mess with that. Like, they got snipers up on the roof. Why would I want to get onto a high ground position? What are the odds of me living through that, right? It's not that they're not capable of doing that job, but there's a visual component that deters the vast majority of people. So that bubble still exists and it looks real. And I'm sure they did, close in wanding and all of that stuff. But if you've been doing that day after day after day, week after week after week, and that complacency starts sliding in a little bit, and, yeah, maybe they missed one thing where it's like figuring out what channel to have the radios on, which probably sounds to people like something that could not happen. And it's happened to me in my own operational career where you literally didn't take the time because you either forgot or felt like you didn't have the time to do it. And you need to talk to somebody and they're on the same, your freaks could match if you were on the right channel, but you neglected to get the channel that you were going to cross coordinate on. It becomes a real-time problem, which is kind of what it looked like, what happened in that environment.
Let me ask you a question about this, because this was a hot topic in the congressional hearings. Initially, the director of the Secret Service, she gets grilled. She like self-detonates on during this hearing and just gets eviscerated. I mean, she's horrible. I mean, it's the worst congressional hearing I've ever seen because she's incompetent. She references the investigation by the FBI instead of answering the questions because she wants to void all the truth and honesty. And then she steps down the following day. The acting director seems more squared away, but he's got a profound ego. All I read from him was like, he's got an ego. And he's like backing his guys, and I get that. But it's like a lot of the things that he said didn't make sense to me. And one of the things that stood out was this rangefinder. Because he said when this guy used this rangefinder, it did not meet the criteria for being a immediate threat. So, you have, let's just call it imminent and immediate. Like, let's say imminent is like there's a potential danger, right? And then immediate is like it's if he's got a gun. Why is that not a potential like full stop? Why is that not criteria? If a dude pulls out a rangefinder from any distance on any occasion in the middle of a rally, just like I've had this happen in combat, guy like pulls out a rangefinder in combat. It's like that's criteria for rules of engagement.
Yeah, that's hostile intent
for dumping that dude. Like you don't use rangefinders for any recreational activity in the middle of a rally, right? There's no real reason to justify that. What do you think about that?
So I actually know the Secret Service answer to what likely should have been done, and I don't want to air out the tactic that they use when things like this happen because they have an answer to it. I don't know if they put that answer into place, but you got to remember it's not war, right? Yeah, if I am overseas, and this is a situation from my own life. If I'm overseas in an Overwatch position, providing Overwatch security for an element that is in the low ground, and I see a military age male moving in a manner that he seems to be trying to be, I don't want to say inconspicuous. He is tactically maneuvering, trying to achieve a high ground position while not being seen from the low ground. And he achieves a high ground position and he pulls out a pair of binoculars and is observing my element on the ground that I am there for Overwatch. I am engaging that person. But people may not understand, they always have room for hostile act, which is very easy. Somebody shooting at you, or hostile intent. Maybe that's somebody carrying PKM ammo to the person shooting the PKM, or somebody with a radio and a set of binoculars reporting on positions so they can line up, mortar fire, something like that. That meets our criteria. That's not what it's at in a rally though, right? So we have a civilian police force in a local area. Maybe the guy's a fucking golfing fan, right? There are bubbles and rings of security. So that would have gotten caught and probably confiscated if they would have come closer in. I think that was happening at a range that was outside of that really close in bubble. And again, I know they have an answer for that type of stuff, But again, how many days had they been on the road? Like, these are the things that I wonder if they'll come out in an investigation. How many stops had that been sequentially? What was the work shift like for the agents that were on site? How many of them, were full-time agents versus people that they were pulling from local law enforcement? What was the ratio there? There's a lot of questions about that, but I don't think, binoculars, people pull those out at rallies sometimes.
Yeah.
I have ballistic binoculars, right? I could hit a button and be getting a range solution. I use them when we've hunted together.
Yeah.
So I could technically be doing the same thing, but with no malicious intent. You know what I mean? Like, it's a tough one because we're not in war and we don't have that ROE. And you know as well as I do, security detail type work, personal, we call it PSD, personal security detail. It was my least favorite thing we ever trained for because it's 100% reactive. You have to watch people do those things, and you can't just turn around and engage that person, because what if you're wrong?
Yeah.
Right? You almost have to wait. Now, somebody climbing on a fucking roof with a weapon clearly in display, that to me is where it gets to the point of, what is going on here? How did nobody see that? How was action not taken before that person got to a place where they were engaging a former president? Because I truly believe it is actually just luck that Trump is still alive.
Yeah.
Not skill, unfortunately. And I have nothing but respect for the officers, both local law enforcement, federal, state, all of those things that were working there. Unfortunately, this person got into a place that the only reason that the former president is still alive is that this guy sucked at shooting.
Yeah. Well, he used an AK-15. If you just use an AR-15, I mean...
Dude, they gave you 8 rounds on a sighted-in M4, iron sights. How many do you think you could put in the kill zone of an E-type silhouette?
8 within a 3-inch group?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
All 8 would be on that E-type
and
silhouette.
And the 3-inch group is like the variability of muzzle velocity based on the lot of ammo and feet per second. Like, it wouldn't be my issue. It would be the ammo lot issue.
They got lucky. What would you do if you were the head of the Secret Service? So again, we don't have to talk about what happened because it did. The why of this individual, like, that's another conversation. The how, I think, is where it all comes back to. What would you do if you were the head of that organization?
I'd fire a lot of guys. I mean, I think...
What if you don't have the people to replace them with?
Yeah, so I don't think it's a manning guys and gals
Very sexist,
issue.
By the way, to say guys.
Yeah, it's not a guy issue. Look, I think the American people, as well as I, are tired of no consequences within the government for anything that's botched. The Afghanistan withdrawal, completely botched. 13 Americans killed. I went to one of the gals' funerals that was a former, or that was a Marine that was killed on that day. And it's brutal that you're sitting back as an American taxpayer. You see all the things that the government is incapable of doing, all the incompetence, and things that are obvious like this, where some people didn't do their job and nobody's held accountable. That's what's aggravating for me. And what does that mean? Well, people want to see people fired. People want to see potentially people charged. Everybody's held accountable at every level, especially if the government's going after you, right? But if it's turned and flipped on its head, there's no accountability. If I was the head of the Secret Service, one, I would fire the people that were in charge of those very specific things instantaneously, because there is no debate that there were errors. So who was in charge? Fired. And I would publicly announce that. These people were fired, and there are likely going to be more people that are fired, because I have zero tolerance for people not doing their job. The people who did do their job were likely on the ground that day in the midst of it. The people in the Tactical Operations Center, because they run a TOC, they run like an active HQ, they were likely the people not doing their job. And so for me, it would be very easy. You fire the people who are responsible. You take ownership of that specific thing. I think even in my own position as the director, after I fix the problem, I would probably resign. I mean, this isn't like an error that happened that was clerical. This is an assassination attempt where nearly the president, a former president of the United States, was killed. And we haven't had that since 1981 with Reagan. So it's like, this is not like a small issue.
I think I would, if I was the head of the Secret Service, I would actually go and talk to the president and vice president and say, listen, if you don't want this to happen again, I need you guys to essentially stay in place and allow us, the Secret Service, for like the next 72 hours to go to minimum manning so we can do the most robust after action review process we've ever done.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Because the more they move, the more people they need, right? Like, I'm not saying that the dignitaries shouldn't be protected, but then the leadership needs to go to this location and look at exactly what happened. They need to walk it and reverse engineer everything back to the how. So everything should be looked at from, how did this happen? Was this a failure in policy? Was this a failure in standards? Was this a failure in training? And they have to work it back and strip away all these feelings of, like, what are we going to look like to the public? We don't want to seem like we're incompetent. Fuck all that. You guys just had a survived assassination attempt due to luck, not due to skill. If we don't want that to happen again, we have got to break this organization down to the brass tacks and start building it back up. Did we have the right agents, the right type of agents on site that day? If we didn't, why? How did we allow that to happen? Are our agents, did they respond in the manner that they were supposed to? If they didn't, how did we allow that to happen? Is that a standard issue, a training issue? I would literally shut that shit down, go there, do a thorough review, and drastically start making changes. Otherwise, it's only a matter of time. And again, luck until something like this happens again.
Yeah. A hot wash after action review by the Secret Service should have been mandatory. The fact that they didn't do that as leaders, I mean,
they may have internally. You and I don't have access to that, but
I think what I saw is during the congressional hearing, both the director and the acting director gets fired or resigns a couple days after the congressional hearing. But I saw in full both of those hearings. Both of them, at the time of being grilled, didn't have the timeline, for example, of everything that happened. It's like, how are you going to show up to a congressional hearing where you're being pressed by leaders in the government who represent Americans and constituents in America who are holding you accountable? How do you not have the timeline? How have you not walked? And both of them said they hadn't been to the actual site.
Yeah.
How do you not physically go when Congress and senators, congressmen and women and senators go to the actual site and walk it, where they have more information, looking out of the window, seeing the rooftop where the shooter was, going, wow, that's how close it was? And you haven't physically done that as the leader? The first thing you should do is leverage your assets to make that happen, and whiteboarded that entire thing. So when you went, you knew all the complexity of every single thing that happened, because that's what a leader does. And that's why the American people are pissed.
Look at, there are environments that are not permissive for after actions and they still do them. Extortion 17 is a good example.
Yeah.
13 years ago, not in the middle, but in Afghanistan, in an environment that is not permissive for Americans, where a substantial amount of military special operations personnel lost their life, they still secured that area and did a thorough investigation.
Yeah.
To the point where they knew which rotor blade on that 47 was actually impacted first and had the cascading impact of basically detonating their entire rotor system above. They were able to figure out the trigonometry, the trajectory, and the actual blade itself. That's in an environment where people are actively trying to fucking kill you.
Yeah.
It can be done.
Yeah.
But you have to make it a priority and an emphasis.
Yeah, during the lone survivor, this Marcus Luttrell thing, during Red Wings, I was there during Red Wings. Our company actually rescued Marcus Luttrell in the village. I was on QRF sitting on an HLZ in Konar province. After that happened, I think it was 60 days later, we got a full after action review disseminated countrywide to all special operations personnel. We read that in detail, and I knew all the nuance and all of the things that went wrong, so we could never make that mistake again. And that's something that should always be done. But it's like, why would they not do that? And why would they not? The thing that I saw during the congressional hearing that I thought was very impactful was them grilling the director and assistant director or acting director and saying, the American people just want you to be honest and upfront. Why would you not hold press conferences and tell the American people what's going on? Like, hey, here's the investigation. This is unprecedented. We're going to do something, and we're going to be very transparent. When you don't talk, why do you think conspiracy theories start to come to the surface? Because people are guessing and assuming. And you just got to be over communicative in these kind of situations because this is unprecedented, very historical. And it's like you get it right by just being fully transparent, or you get it wrong and you're an embarrassment to the organization forever because you simply just didn't do your job. And I see a lack of leadership in the Secret Service. And this is just an outside perspective. You have a lot more insight on this, but it just seems like the very top seems to be constrained by some kind of political force. And then all the guys underneath, I can't imagine the morale is very high in the Secret Service, but it seems like all the top level supervisors across multiple organizations, including the FBI, including the CIA, they just are getting it wrong. And maybe that's a cultural issue. Maybe that's just the place that we're at culturally, but it just seems like they're getting it wrong, man.